artist, writer, storyteller. Frank Tashlin was one of the founding fathers of the Looney Tunes. He arrived almost on cue to step into the director's chair and work alongside animation legends like Tex Avery. He helped define the style that set the tone for the greatest cartoon studio of all time. But who was Frank Tashlin? A man whose heart was as big as his artistry was rich.
I think Frank's stuff was a little less about character development and a little more about gags, and that's kind of more in the Tex Avery, Bob Clampett vein. But he had his own style.
A lot of cartoons before the Clampett-Tashlin era were trying to be cute or interesting or humorous, and not many cartoon makers really went for the out-loud laugh. And Tashlin was somebody who really wanted the audience to laugh out loud.
He used a lot of streamline and deco designs in his cartoons. He was really very modern and with it, and really ahead of what some of the other directors were doing.
He paved the way for some of his colleagues to try new and daring things. Doesn't always get credit for it.
Frank Tashlin didn't do as many cartoons.
But he is one of the greats. He's one of the absolute greats of Warner Brothers cartoons.
Tashlin was born in Weehawken, New Jersey in 1913. It might be considered providence that he was born within a year of Gertie the Dinosaur, Winsor McCay's landmark piece of animation. In essence, Tashlin grew up with the cartoons. Tash's love of art formed at an early age. In 1929, he entered the business as an errand boy for Max and Dave Fleischer's Out of the Inkwell Films. A year later, he took his first serious job working for the Van Buren Corporation, producers of the popular Aesop Fables series. He quickly moved up the ranks, from inker to in-betweener, and finally to animator. Under this nickname, Tish Tash, he developed the Van Buren cartoon strip, a parody of his boss that quickly attracted attention.
Van Buren was kind of doing the things that everybody wanted to say about the bosses they worked for, but they couldn't speak. So this was their outlet.
And ran quite successfully in the 30s in the LA Times.
And that's kind of how he got to Los Angeles from New York, and then went to work with Schlesinger.
He was a real multi-talent. He could write, he could draw, he could design, he could certainly direct.
His first picture was Porky's Poultry Plant.
Boy, what a day.
It's one of the first I worked on, and I was there too recent to really appreciate how great it was. In later years, I could see that it really was a gem.
He came in around the same time as Tex Avery, and Tex Avery brought in a really wacky sense of humor into the cartoons, which Tashlin definitely shared. The difference is Tashlin brought a real sense of speed that hadn't been there before.
While Tex Avery, great as he was, gets a lot of credit for speeding up the cartoons, Tashlin, I think, did it first.
Combined with what was going on with Tex Avery, that's really the seeds, the base, the root of Warner Brothers cartoons is right there. And Tashlin is a significant part of that.
Somebody had made the comment that compared my father to Tex in the style, and he says there's no comparison. Tex Avery was the master of his time, and he looked up to him in a big way, and I think they had a mutual respect for each other, but he never felt he could be on the same level as what he was doing.
He was a terrific guy. He didn't even have his own office. He had a desk in the background department. He was a big guy, big tall guy, and he was like a big teddy bear. He was just wonderful.
He was great. It made it easy for us to work with, and also made us more appreciative as being part of the scene, you know. They'd give you, you know, the business at hand. Just do whatever you want with it now.
Clampett told me that he used to drive Tashlin to work. He played practical jokes on all the time. Clampett had a convertible, and they'd drive down Melrose on the way to work. And they were always looking at the beautiful women on Melrose. And Tashlin would point one out. Check that one out, Bob. And Bob says, that one over there? You like her? All right. And he'd all of a sudden do a U-turn right in the middle of the street, pull the car up so Frank's right there in front of the girl, and Bob would say, tell her what you just told me, Frank. And he'd like, get me out of here.
He had a phrase that he always says, "I'm never where I'm at." You know, he'd be directing cartoons, but he'd be lusting after being a camera person, you know, on a Raoul Walsh or Michael Curtiz picture. He really wanted to do that, and he would study them. He probably went out, when he was working for Schlesinger, probably went out on the main lot at Warner's and watched some of these guys working. Probably really enjoyed it.
After a year of innovative experimentation, Frank Tashlin left Schlesinger in 1938, heading over to the Walt Disney Studios. For the next 2 years, he was the resident gag and story man for some of Disney's funniest shorts, including Mickey and the Beanstalk, a story for which he never received credit. Always searching for a creative challenge, Tashlin moved to Columbia to head up their Screen Gems cartoons, where he directed The Fox and the Grapes, a cartoon that would have a big impact on Chuck Jones's Roadrunner and Coyote series many years later. But as fortune would have it, Tash returned to the Looney Tunes in 1942, where he pushed the limits of puns, speed, visual sight gags, and topical humor.
And his work had become even speedier, even more stylized.
He had a really interesting drawing style. His drawing style didn't belong in the Warner Brothers family. His drawing style was more like magazine cartoon style. It was more like New Yorker.
And in his 30s stuff, it looks more streamlined, modern style. There's a lot of arch shapes and very round shapes and things like that. That was more the style in the 30s.
As I grew inside, so did I grow by.
And by the time he was doing Nasty Quacks and pictures like that in the 40s, it was more squares and triangles.
Touché, number two.
It's a bit out of place in the 40s. His cartoons do kind of stand out as not the pure Warner Brothers kind of style, but his humor is.
He published a book called How to Draw Cartoons in 1943, and he introduced something called the Scott art technique, which is square, circle, oval, and triangle. Nasty Quacks has a lot of that thinking in it, has that Scott art technique. You can almost see that Daffy's head's made out of a triangle, and his body's made out of a square, and maybe his back end's built from an oval. And the shapes are very geometric, looking forward towards UPA, which simplified it even more and just made one bean shape, say, for a character, like in Christopher Crumpet. The dad's just one great big bean.
In fact, UPA cartoons really, although they're lauded for inventing new styles of drawing, they didn't. They went back to the 30s, magazine cartoon illustration. They just did it animated. But Frank Tashlin drew like that naturally.
Just about my favorite Tashlin cartoon is Porky Pig's Feet, where Porky and Daffy are trying to get out of a hotel without paying the bill. The hotel manager is about to slap Daffy Duck. He deliberately pans away to Porky, and Porky's reaction and the sound effect. And then you come back to Daffy, and all you see is the sting of the slap. He was always doing that. He was thinking in terms of filmmaking, filmic storytelling, if you will, for the purpose of getting over a funny gag.
A lot of times in humor, you try to nail the camera down. As you pan or track along or something, you're changing the background, and the background suddenly becomes as interesting as a character because it's constantly revealing new information. But a few people, like Tashlin, were able to make it funny with a moving camera.
One of my favorite Tashlins is Puss in Booty, which is ostensibly a standard cat and bird cartoon, but it's presented as if it was directed by Hitchcock. It's full of really dramatic angles. If you actually shot a live-action picture using these as storyboards, it would be pretty darn good. I think actually Jones mostly learned a lot from him.
People don't think about editing as a component of these cartoons, these Warner Brothers cartoons, but Tashlin understood editing.
Oh, Porky, Porky!
He's cutting scenes at an accelerated pace, the way a really talented director might.
Probably the best example of it is in Porky's Romance, where he has cuts that are as brief as 4 or 6 frames. That is about a quarter of a second of screen time, and that kind of rapid cutting is very energizing.
Oh, Porky! I'm so glad to see you!
It's astonishing to watch. And it's more astonishing when you compare it to the other cartoons being made that year. Look at anyone else's cartoons made the same year as Porky's Romance. You won't see anything like that.
He was always thinking ahead to something else, like daydreaming, and putting so much fast cutting and camera angles and things in. that was just him daydreaming, just thinking of things he'd rather be doing than directing cartoons.
When you look at the work of Tashlin, you see a guy who was actually quoted as saying that the only reason he made cartoons was because he wanted to make features.
The Swooner Crooner earned Tashlin an Oscar nomination and was widely received as a fan favorite. But by the mid-40s, Tashlin was getting increasingly interested in moving his career into motion pictures. He left cartoons to focus on writing, working as a gag man for Harpo Marx and Eddie Bracken, and by 1951 got his break for co-writing the Bob Hope feature, The Lemon Drop Kid. A year later, Hope took a chance on Tashlin, giving him the director's job for one of his finest films, Son of Paleface. Over the next 20 years, Tashlin used his stylized combination of wit, satire, and slapstick sight gags to further explore his own dreams. He found himself working alongside the best talents in Hollywood, but it was his 8 films with Jerry Lewis that will forever remain his landmark collaboration.
You could see a lot of the elements of animation in his live-action film.
You can also see his cartoon work is in some ways kind of a dry run leading up to that unlike, say, Avery or Jones, who were very much at home in animation and never really needed to go out into other kinds of media to any great degree, Tashlin found his real niche when he got into live action and the kind of Jane Mansfield, Red Skelton, Jerry Lewis, Rock Hudson comedies that he did so well.
When he directed Bob Hope and Jerry Lewis and even Doris Day in the various comedies they did for him, they have very cartoony gags, very exaggerated gag ideas.
In fact, there's a Jerry Lewis film where he has to take care of a little kid, and it's almost shot for shot Brother Brat with the hatchets, you know, about 2 inches away from Jerry Lewis's face. So it's a kind of thing where he took that cartoon viewpoint and translated it even more successfully into live action.
He wrote a movie called The Good Humor Man that he did not direct, that's just a catalog of sight gags.
Like with Jane Mansfield, one of the most notorious sight gags, I think it's in The Girl Can't Help It. She's walking down the street with 2 great big milk bottles, you know, in front of her, and then the tops pop off. You know, it's all those weird, like, risque little gags that he threw in.
That's Tash all the way, only he would come up with something like that kind of, you know, kind of raised an eyebrow but got a chuckle at the same time.
As a progenitor of a certain kind of wacky surrealism, that if Tashlin had not come from a cartoon background, I'm not so sure that the wackiness of a picture like Son of Paleface or Artists and Models, which is a masterpiece, would really be quite the same.
He was fast at doing what he did, regardless if it was bad weather or poor production or whatever the case was. He really worked fast through the whole process. And I think that's what kept the studios happy, because they knew they would get the project done and get it out and go on to the other one. And the amount of films he made in a short period of time, to me, is amazing.
Have you got any cats that want to film, baby?
Tashlin had a fantastic career writing books about how to do cartoons, how to make films. He did fiction books that were parables. He did one called The Bear That Wasn't, which, coincidentally, Chuck Jones adapted into an animated film years later in the 60s for MGM.
It's about a bear that goes and hibernates, and he wakes up and there's a factory built around them. You know, it was during the time when everybody was lining up to go to work in factories, and, you know, everybody was trying to be the same. And he kept telling everybody, I'm a bear, you know. I'm not a human, I'm a bear. And they kept, oh, sure, Mr. Bear.
He portrayed life kind of in a sad manner, to see what the world had actually turned into and how human beings had actually turned into different than they'd ever been before. See that in a lot of his work, where it was trying to be funny, and but yet it was sad that this is how things really are.
Yes, sir, I'm a bear. That's what I said. You are not a bear. You're a silly man who needs a shave and wears a fur coat.
I think Frank's influence on the current generation comes in the speed, comes in the clarity of poses, comes in dynamic camera angles. I think a lot of things that everybody tries to get into their work, whether consciously or unconsciously, they will often remember from a Frank Tashlin cartoon.
I really think the cartoons were probably the happiest part of his life. It was new, it was fresh, it was creative. He loved what he did, and every day was a new challenge, and making people laugh was something he was really fond of. I mean, it was a definite passion of his.
Frank Tashlin is more well known in some circles as a live-action director, and it's almost a footnote, almost a trivial footnote that he started off with Looney Tunes, but not to us who love cartoons. This is his real home.
I think it was a tragedy that he left Warner's to do live action. In my opinion, if you leave animation to do live action, you're actually stepping down. But he erroneously thought it was a step upward, I guess. He should have stayed with us.
It's been said that the saddest thing about Frank Tashlin's career is that he died before the critics realized how significant his work really was. Tashlin was a true Renaissance man, an artist whose presence is deeply felt in all he touched. His stories were for both children and adults, and they touched upon a humanity within us that is often overlooked.